So Happy New Year, everyone. And with that, Admiral Ziemer, please go ahead.
Yeah, and good afternoon or early afternoon to some of you, or late morning. It's really great. Thanks for carving out some time to do what you're doing and giving us an opportunity to update you on some of the malaria work and then how the collaboration is going with some of this new work that you're doing. So again, I am at a disadvantage because I'm not able to see you. Glad you can see us. Let me just make a couple opening comments, and then I look forward to any questions that you might have to follow up on. First of all, let me just thank you for what you're doing and the application of your time as volunteers, but also not only the time, but the application of that. In my world, there's an awful lot of rhetoric going on about volunteers and partnering and application of innovation, and it ends up being kind of placed in the corner of lip service. This particular effort that has been ongoing now with the malaria application since it was featured at the White House last year with the sponsorship of Ms. Beth Goodman, along with volunteer youth mappers and some of our corporate sponsors. It was an application of innovation, program support, and also measurable impact. And I can count on one hand where we've been able to put that together in our program, the Presidents Malaria Initiative, which is one of the pillars of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Program. By way of background, President Bush launched the Presidents Malaria Initiative shortly after he launched the emergency response to HIV called PEPFAR. And that was because he was concerned about economic development and education in primarily with a focus on Africa. When someone got to him and informed him that malaria was actually undermining health, education, and economic development to a greater extent than HIV was, he made a decision to do something about that. Hence, the President's Malaria Initiative was launched. The initial target was to help the countries reduce the malaria cases and deaths by 50% in the first 5 to 6 years. The good news is that was exceeded. And the better news is that while it was launched by President Bush, it was embraced and expanded under President Obama. And so we've been the beneficiary of strong political support by 2 administrations and furthermore, strong congressional support, bipartisan congressional support from our Congress. That enabled the funding to continue to flow. The support of the Malaria Initiative is a major foreign assistance initiative to keep going. And we have expanded from 15 to 19 countries over the last 10 years. In the World Health Organization's report, last year's report, attributed a 6.3 million malaria deaths have been averted, and a drop of cases overall on an average of 66%. In some of the countries in Africa, it was as high as 71, 72% among kids under 5. And so your tax dollars, the U.S. government's commitment to fight malaria in Africa has had a major impact as we have partnered up with the host governments as well as some of our other partners. So that's part of the good news. We've seen the annual malaria deaths drop from 1 million to about 480,000 per year. What that equates to is every 2 minutes in sub-Saharan Africa, a child is dying of malaria, and that's not okay. So while we celebrate progress, there's an awful lot of work to be done. The sober reality for me personally is to make sure now that the new administration sees this as a priority, a global health priority and continues the funding, not only for this program, but for other significant foreign assistance health programs. So that's the context. It is a good news story. It is a successful U.S. government foreign assistance program. It's transparent, and the collaboration with the partners, both the funding partners and the implementing partners, has been quite successful. So as we look to the future, that's where we have to roll up our sleeves and keep our heads to the ground, heads down and our wheels turning. So we have 4 basic interventions. 3 are prevention, and 1 is through the case management. It's the diagnosis and treatment of malaria cases. What we're concentrating on here through this whole initiative with mapping is to focus in on one of the 3 prevention interventions, and that's the application to indoor residual spraying. The 2 principal prevention interventions are the use of bed nets. And if you do use a bed net, you know that's not only a barrier to the mosquito, but it also kills the mosquito if it lands on the net, seeking the carbon dioxide of the human on the other side of the fabric. We also spray the inside of the walls in these homes. And what that does is that once the mosquito has bitten a person, the entomologists tell us that the mosquito will go over to the wall of the home and rest there, and when it does that, it kills the mosquito. So it keeps the mosquito from moving and flying to another human to infect it with the parasite that causes malaria. So it's a different prevention intervention, it's a different application, and this is where the mapping really helps us out, because we target a coverage of 80% coverage at the population at risk that we're serving, and that is pregnant women and kids under 5. And if we can get our interventions up to an 80% coverage level, that gives us the assurance that it's having the highest impact we can. So when we go into the most rural areas where we work, they're uncharted, they're unknown, they're pretty hard to quantify, and so the mapping exercise has proven that we can actually more clearly identify homes that need to be sprayed so that we can achieve our 80% coverage goal. Last year, the work that the mapping volunteers and teams did helped us in northern Mozambique. I think some of you maybe have been part of that. We attribute the fact that we covered and touched over 1.9 million people in 7 districts, and now we're applying the same technology to a province in Kenya. Not only is malaria prevention and treatment good for health, but it is also directly beneficial to economic development. On the downside, if you go to Malawi and talk to a mother who earns under $2 a day, if one of her children catches malaria, it takes her out of the workforce for 3 to 5 days per child per incident, and most of those moms have 4 to 5 kids. And so malaria prevention and treatment is a direct economic benefit to her. The health economists that we work with tell us that 35% of disposable income of this under $2 a day wage earner goes to malaria control. Now that's economic impact in an adverse way. Now if you apply good malaria prevention and control in a workforce environment like the Ashanti Gold region in western Ghana, good malaria prevention and treatment allowed us to see a drop in lost work days from over 6,900 all the way down to 300. And so the business people looked at this as a return on investment and it kept people at work. So on the positive side, good malaria treatment and control has direct economic impact to individuals as well as to the economy. So the U.S. government's commitment to fighting malaria and seeking elimination is not only a noble cause, but it is a good development commitment. And so as we look at accelerating our objectives of eliminating malaria as a major health burden in Africa and Asia, we're looking for new technologies and new science in order to apply to our strategies and to improve our interventions. Hence, what you're doing has a direct impact on all of that. So I just, number one, want to thank you for your time, for your interest, and the work that you do, because it enables us to do our work better. And so on behalf of the team here and on behalf of the beneficiaries over there in Africa and Asia, let me express my thanks and look forward to answering any questions you might have. Chad, anything you want me to add?
Thank you. No, I think that was very good. A nice background. The Admiral here, as you know, runs the PMI program, and I've been leading the effort on the mapping side with the OpenStreetMap community and the youth mappers. So I might be able to answer any technical questions on the mapping and the end data, whereas the Admiral, will be able to answer anything related to the PMI program.
Thank you, Chad. Let me open up questions here in Sunnyvale. Yeah, you might have to speak up, make sure. Yeah, there's a microphone should be right in front of you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good.
Oh, okay. It's been a few years since I've done some work on this, kind of related to mapping, but more data analysis. But when I did some work on this, they were using DDT, as we know it, to spray. And I know that there was an initiative to replace that with something else. Is that still ongoing? Are we replacing? Because it is an effective use of DDT, although it's got a bad name here. Is that being replaced then?
Yeah, let me make two. That's a really good question. I get it frequently, less so nowadays than I used to. But if you look at the list of approved insecticides that WHO puts out as a safe public application of insecticides, DDT is one of 12 on that list. The truth is the mosquitoes have developed a resistance to DDT, and so as of now, we're not using DDT, not because of the perceived concern and threat to health, but because it's not as effective as some of the pyrethroids that we're currently using. The bad news is the mosquitoes are now developing resistance to pyrethroids as well. And so there's an urgent need to develop new insecticides that we can either alternate in to abate the resistance or to replace these effective insecticides. DDT was cheap, it was effective, and it lasts longer than any other insecticide that was in our portfolio. And so from a business case, it was the best insecticide to use. Unfortunately, because of the resistance, it's been on the shelf now and we don't use it. From a public health perspective, WHO certifies that as a safe, effective tool to use for spraying inside homes. And we here in the United States, as you know, were beneficiaries of that years ago. We used to have malaria here in Washington and in the South. DDT was used along with other insecticides. It's very effective in bed bugs too. There's some discussion about bringing it back to nail the bed bugs in Washington, D.C. and New York City. But I hope that answers your question.
Yep, it does. Thank you.
Any questions, any further questions, Sunnyvale?
Yeah. I was just wondering the follow-on process after we've drawn outlines of buildings in some of these hot tasks. What happens then? I mean, do you purely use that, or do you go add any attribution to the buildings, i.e., people who live there, before you go out and do the malaria work?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. In Mozambique, we actually partnered with the Peace Corps, and once the areas had been mapped, you know, obviously you can't tell if that is a structure where someone resides in the evening and needs to be sprayed, or if it's a tool shed. So what we did is we had Peace Corps volunteers that went out and surveyed sample spots in some of these communities, and then we had a factor that would tell us out of these 100 buildings, you know, 90% of them needed to be sprayed. So that way, when we, you know, extracted all of the buildings and got our final counts for how many buildings were there, we'd know that, you know, we'd have to subtract approximately 10% to get an accurate count, a more accurate count of how many sprayable structures there are.
Yeah, let me add one other thing too. Indoor residual spraying, the whole spraying program is a very effective but expensive intervention. And so when we do spray, we're trying to focus in on the most endemic places, provinces, and districts so that we can reduce the malaria impact as quickly as possible. What that means is there's a need for recurring spraying cycles, either semi-annually or annually. And so as we do this work, it actually refines the database so that we get closer and closer to that probability of making sure we cover 80% of the dwellings. Because the key here is to identify and spray those homes where people are sleeping at night. So this actually helps us improve the baseline data so that our business plan, we can plan for funding, scheduling, and then costing it out, and then making sure that we have the coverage at the right level. I hope that helps.
One more question on Sunnyvale? Yeah, come over to the microphone.
Hello. How quickly can you reflect the current malaria spread in mapping? What I mean is, for example, if natural disaster hits, such as 2004 tsunami and earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia affected situation in India, for example, and after such natural disasters, it can create a hotspot of malaria and other diseases, if you will. And how quickly can the map be updated to reflect that?
Yeah, I think as we look at this and we get smarter, we have to understand that when we have a tsunami or an earthquake or a natural disaster or refugees on the move, that is really a humanitarian crisis scenario. What we're applying this science and new technology and info to is a more stable, predictable environment where we know the people are living, working, going to school. The application of interventions to reduce the risk of malaria varies depending on which scenario you're poking into, and also which is most cost effective and how do we cover the most people at risk. And so what we're doing in Zambezi and Mozambique and now in Kenya is applying this science to a more stable environment. If in fact you're in a crisis environment, then malaria becomes really a secondary concern to just keeping people fed, warm, and alive. So I think it depends on the environmental risk, the number of people, and then the money and the interventions available and how best to use them. I know in some cases in Uganda, Sudan, and some of these very volatile areas in Africa, we work with the UN Refugee Commission to identify nets for the constituencies to use. So bed nets are cheaper, easier to get to the people, and they provide coverage. The only problem with that is those people usually don't have much money, and so the bed nets become a commodity that they can either use for barter or for sale. So there are a lot of different dynamics that have to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Is there anybody in Cape Horn that wants to ask a question? Still here in Sunnyvale.
Panama, we are Cape Horn.
Oh, excuse me, Panama, sorry. Above us, Panama. Okay, so let's go over to Seattle. You questions? Be sure to unmute your microphone.
Hi, I have a couple of questions regarding your partnerships. Once your program sort of reaches on the ground overseas, I'm wondering, do you partner with many local NGOs / civil society organizations, or is it mainly governmental bodies or UN, IMF, WB, Red Cross, those types of organizations? And then sort of a follow-up to that, do you have a system to follow the distribution of materials and or money? And do you prefer distributing materials over money to local organizations in order to combat malaria?
Yeah, well, let me just get clarification on the second question. I have the first one, but the second one.
I'm sort of wondering, do you prefer distributing materials such as bed nets, such as DEET spray, or any other sort of combative spray for mosquitoes? Or do you typically fund some of these local organizations or government bodies to go ahead and purchase those items themselves? And do you have sort of a system in place for maintaining whether or not the money or materials were used correctly and so forth?
Yeah, good. Yeah, excellent questions, both of them. First of all, on the partnership piece, I think it's important for me to emphasize that the most important partner is the host country itself. And so the U.S. government approach is to work with countries that already have some plan. Some of them are very robust, some of them are quite simple and quite immature. That said, our approach is to look at the country plan, look at the gaps, look at the requirements, and then as a funder, look at ways we can leverage other funding sources from the Global Fund, the World Bank, UNICEF, or the private NGOs, as well as the government. And so we work single plan to fund multiple components of malaria prevention, treatment, and sustaining the program. So we build on the front end, we invest between 40 and 50 to 55% in commodities, bed nets, spraying, rapid diagnostic test kits, the purchase of anti-malarial drugs. And then we spend a significant amount of money in training health workers, laboratory training and building capacity there, supply chain management, et cetera, et cetera. So we're in it for the full recipe of development assistance from A to Z. As far as partnerships, we partner with everybody. Right now, we have over 200 partners, including the high-level guys like the Global Fund, the bank, and UNICEF. Those are the high-level multilateral partners. But we also have multiple NGOs, other nonprofits. A third of those are faith-based organizations that are resident in the country. Okay, and so partnership is our lifeline to success. I consider what you're doing as a component of that partnership at a very, very high end. While you might volunteer an hour a week or a couple hours a month, what you do and the application of that is a significant partnership activity. How do you measure it and how do you quantify it? We'll leave that up to those that worry about that. But for me, I am just grateful that you're spending time and interested in moving the malaria agenda forward through what you do, your time, and your technology. I hope that kind of addresses the partnership piece. Oh, yes, the Red Cross is the partner, Peace Corps. I think if you could name a partner out there, they're probably someone that we're talking to. And in one of our 20 plus countries, we're holding hands and working together. On the distribution of funds, we work from a business plan before we go into any country or renew the program. We again go back to the basic country requirements, looking at commodity needs, looking at training needs, and looking at how do we sustain the programs that are in place that are effective. And then the money is directed through purchasing agents to either buy the commodities. We work with partners to distribute the bed nets and to actually spray. And so we know where every dollar is going. We know where it is, if it's been spent, and then who spent it. All of that is on our website. If you're interested, just go up pmi.gov and you'll see all the countries. You'll see the business plans that we've put in place since 2006 when we started, all the way up through 2016. And you'll see where every dollar has been directed. And then it also has all of the impact that we've collected over the years by country and overall. So I hope that kind of gives you a flavor of how we approach the program in terms of funding. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, that helps a lot.
So it's 12:30, Admiral. Is your time, or do you have a time constraint? It's 12:30 right now.
Well, I'm very conscious of boring you with a lot of details.
Oh, no.
Answer any more questions that you might have.
Sure. I just got sensitive. So
Or
Seattle, do you any more questions, Seattle?
I'd like to ask one.
Good.
So I just wanted to first say thank you for your work. I'm assuming that there are a lot of different efforts to fight malaria. And I don't know if Missing Maps and this OpenStreetMap effort is a primary one, but I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like what work is being done to make Missing Maps and OpenStreetMap like more of a household name, just like how it's, I think that since we can directly contribute to it, it's great to, the more people that know about it, the better.
I'm not sure I got the full extent of the question. Chad, you look like you did. Why don't you pick up and then I'll follow through.
Yeah, well, we are approaching the malaria problem here at USAID in conjunction with the Missing Maps project. The Missing Maps is another group that's doing OpenStreetMap work. I'm sure the Admiral's never heard of Missing Maps before. So we are, I think that the big difference there is we here at USAID and the task that we're working on for USAID, we're working directly with the Presidents Malaria Initiative team, whereas the Missing Maps is working in other countries, and I think they have, they're being funded by other organizations or foundations, and they might be working in slightly different areas. From my understanding, PMI is mainly focused in sub-Saharan Africa. Is that correct?
Yeah. We focused in Africa. Keep in mind, the reason this initiative was launched by the White House and continued under President Obama was they wanted to beat down the global adverse impact of malaria. If you look at the map, 80 to 85% of the cases and deaths come from sub-Saharan Africa. And most of those come from 5 very, very big endemic countries. So our focus, our investment is primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. That said, we have work ongoing in Asia, particularly in the southern Mekong region that covers Cambodia, Burma, and some of the border areas along in Thailand. So we are aware of the Asia problem. We're working with our Asia colleagues. We're investing money in Cambodia and Burma. You're right, the parasite issue is different in Asia than it is in Africa. The falciparum parasite is the dominant one and the most deadly one, and it is resident in Africa. The vivax parasite is resident in Asia. And so It has a different impact from a health and a sickness perspective. Nevertheless, it still undermines economy, education, et cetera, et cetera. So, did that answer your question?
I just opened it up and I was just looking for feedback. So I appreciate it.
No more Seattle? Okay, open it up to Austin. Unmute your microphone if you're asking a question. I can't tell. No, okie. How about you, Andrew?
I think I'm okay.
Okie dokie.
It's really interesting.
All right, good. Thank you very much. So with that, let's conclude. Thank you very much, Admiral. Everyone, give a big hand to Admiral Ziemer. Thank you, Chad. Go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
let me reciprocate by thanking you and giving you a hand. Frankly, I'm more enthused about this as a potential opportunity to look at new applications in innovation than any other thing, other than some of the high-level research we're investing in on vaccine and new drug and diagnostics. But what you're doing helps us improve our day-to-day indoor residual spraying intervention, which is one of the more critical and effective programs we have. So thank you very much for doing that. As a partner, we can now say we have over 200 plus, and I include you in that category. But as you continue to do this and work with Chad here at USAID, if there are other opportunities to inform new people or answer any questions, please know that we'll drop anything to answer any questions you have that might either help your advocacy to recruit more people or to give you a sense that what you're doing actually is having an impact. So thanks very much, and I hope you all have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to drop off, Chad. See ya. Sorry.
See ya.
Okay, bye-bye, you guys.